The right's obsession with rewriting history when it comes to slavery and racism has a disturbing precedent in authoritarianism. In the New York Times, historian Timothy Snyder notes that Republicans banning critical race theory in various states takes a page from Russia's playbook of using memory laws to rewrite the past. He writes that the memory laws arise in a moment of cultural panic when national politicians are suddenly railing against revisionist teachings. In Russia, the supposed revisionists are people who write critically about Stalin or honestly about the Second World War. In the United States, the revisionists are people who write about race. In both cases, revisionism tends to mean the parts of history that challenge leaders' sense of righteousness or make their supporters uncomfortable. Authoritarianism is infantilizing. We shouldn't have to feel any negative emotions, and difficult subjects should be kept from us. Timothy Snyder, the author of that essay and professor of history at Yale University, joins me now. I'm so geeked out and excited that we managed to book you. I saw Nicole Hannah-Jones tweet out your essay. I then read it twice. It was so good and so fascinating. So I want you to just explain to us, because I think it's the perfect name for what we're seeing. What are memory laws?
I'm so glad to be talking to you, and I'm so glad I have a chance to talk about this, because I'm an American, I'm a historian, but I work mostly in other countries. And when I saw these laws passed in the United States and these laws discussed, I was reminded, as you said, of things we've seen in Eastern Europe and particularly in Russia. The basic idea of a memory law is to make governing very easy for an authoritarian regime, because it puts everything into the past and it caters to the emotions of a majority. So you teach the population and you raise the children to think that the past is just there to make you feel good. And then the future goes away. And then everyone lacks the facts that they need to become aware citizens. Citizenship becomes impossible, because you can only be a good citizen if you know the truths, especially the difficult truths about your own country. And you can only raise people to be citizens if you educate them in such a way that they're looking for those difficult truths, so that when they grow up, they'll know how to challenge power. That's the way democracy has to work.
You know, and in the past, our memory laws weren't really laws. They were more bullying. I mean, the Daughters of the Confederacy enforced that the stories of the Civil War and slavery be told from the Confederacy's point of view. And they enforced that for decades and decades. Now you're actually seeing these laws put in that, as you said, and you talked about this idea of discomfort shouldn't be there. These critical, sort of quote unquote, critical race theory bills, which don't have anything to do with real critical race theory, they all have the same language in Arizona, Iowa, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas. And this is the language. An individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or other form of psychological distress solely because of the individual's race. So it bars any teaching that would cause an individual to feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or other form of psychological distress because of their race. Meaning you can't teach, let's say, about Jim Crow or about Ruby Bridges in a way that says, well, those white people were screaming at Ruby Bridges, because that will make the white kids feel uncomfortable. You can't say Jim Crow was done by white people because it would make white kids feel uncomfortable. Those are memory laws, right?
Yeah. And again, I mean, if it helps, we can look away from our own country for a minute to look at other countries, and we can see what two authoritarian patterns are here. One authoritarian pattern is that if you put these kind of censorship laws over the heads of teachers, then teachers are going to have to self-censor, right? So I'm a teacher myself. I teach history. I'm making up my lesson plans, just like thousands of teachers are, in July for September. And I know that those teachers across the country are thinking about these laws. They're thinking about what they can and can't teach. And they're going to be very conservative this fall, and they're going to teach worse, and the students are going to suffer as a result of it. That's one way authoritarianism works, is self-censorship. The second way it works is denunciation. So the state lays down the law. The state gives a clear signal of what it doesn't want to happen, what should happen, what shouldn't happen, and then it expects people to rise up and respond. And that's exactly what's happening. Teachers fired in Tennessee, courses canceled in Oklahoma, because now suddenly people feel authorized to enforce their own views about what should be taught in the classroom, where unfortunately Americans respond to that just like everybody else does.
Do we have to start thinking about teachers being arrested, about students who, let's say, don't like their history teacher naming them and saying they were teaching things that made me uncomfortable as a white student? Are we talking about like arrests? Like, what should we be really realistically being worried about?
Yeah, and that's one of the funny things about these laws, is that these laws prove that critical race theory is true. You know, if you were on the fence about whether it was true or not, like these laws prove that it's true, because the people who are passing these laws are saying, no, we're not racist. This is really neutral. But obviously, they're aiming at a concept of racism, which only makes sense to white people, which is that racism is just about feeling discomfort. Right. And, it's sad to say this, but that's not a concept of racism that can make any sense to anybody who's not white in this country. And then they're authorizing folks, as you say, to say, well, look, talking about lynching makes me feel uncomfortable. Talking about voter suppression makes me feel guilty. And those very concepts, guilt and shame, right? We should feel guilty about lynching. We should feel shamed about voter suppression, right? Those are normal human emotions that are part of growing up. Those are normal human emotions that are part of teaching. I mean, I teach difficult things, and my students have to go through some difficult moments in order to learn. And that's perfectly natural. These laws, as you say, put teachers in the position of being denounced by students and by parents. And that, frankly, as anybody who has studied the history of this kind of thing knows, is the purpose. That is the point. That is what is now supposed to happen.
I have taught lynching to white students, to predominantly white students, and it's uncomfortable to talk about it. They faced it like better adults than a lot of these adults. And you know who feels really uncomfortable seeing the bodies of lynched black people? Black kids, knowing that that is somebody who looked like them. And I don't think that any of these so-called fake critical race theory people ever think about. Timothy Snyder, you are great. I hope everyone will read your piece. I'm going to put it again on my social media. Thank you, thank you, thank you.